Single dad mowing the lawn. When the millionaire next door asks a private service that shocks him. Before the story begins, wherever you are today, this message comes from a single dad who knows struggle and believes in you. The sun beat down on Jake Brennan's neck like a hammer on an anvil, each ray a reminder that honest work came with a price. He'd been pushing the same Toro mower for 3 hours straight, cutting perfect diagonal lines across the expansive lawn of a house he'd never be invited into. Sweat soaked through his faded gray t-shirt, the fabric clinging to shoulders that still carried the frame of a younger, different man, his hands calloused. Scarred in places no lawn care work could explain. Gripped the mower's rubber handle with the steady pressure of someone who understood that precision mattered, even in invisible work. He was 34 years old, though some days he felt 60. Other days, when Emma laughed at breakfast or held his hand crossing the street, he felt 25 again, back when the world still made promises it intended to keep. Today was somewhere in between. It was Thursday, which meant chicken nuggets for dinner, because that's what his daughter had requested on Sunday when they'd planned the week's meals together at their small kitchen table. It meant he had $47 left until Friday's deposit from Greenscape Solutions hit his account. It meant everything was exactly as it should be, tight, controlled, manageable. The neighborhood was called Meadowbrook Estates, though there was no brook and precious little that resembled a meadow. Just wide streets lined with mature oaks, houses that started at $800,000 and climbed quickly into 7 figures, and the kind of silence that money bought. Jake worked here 3 days a week, employed by a company that sent him wherever the grass grew and the wealthy needed someone they'd never have to think about. He preferred it that way. Invisible suited him just fine. He'd finished the Hendersons' property an hour ago, 2 acres, modest by neighborhood standards, and was now working through old Mrs. Patterson's front lawn. She was 86, spent most of her time with her sister in Harrisburg, and her lawn showed it. The grass had grown tall enough to slow the mower's progress, forcing Jake to make a second pass over some sections. He didn't mind. More time meant more money, and more money meant maybe he could get Emma those art supplies she'd been eyeing at Target. The good ones, with the 72 colors, not the 24-pack they usually settled for. A black Mercedes SUV rolled past, its windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. Jake didn't look up. He'd learned early in this work that eye contact with residents was optional at best, unwelcome at worst. He was part of the landscape, same as the ornamental shrubs and the decorative mailboxes shaped like little houses. The Mercedes turned into the circular driveway of the property next door, the Ashford estate, though Jake had never seen anyone actually named Ashford. Just the house, larger than any single person needed, its windows like closed eyes keeping secrets. The mower's engine coughed, sputtered, then caught again. Jake made a mental note to change the spark plug this weekend. Maintenance mattered. His father had taught him that, back when his father was still someone who taught things instead of someone buried under a white cross in a veteran's cemetery in Ohio. "Take care of your equipment, son," the old man had said 1,000 times, "and it'll take care of you." Good advice as far as it went. His father had never mentioned what happened when you took care of everything and everyone around you. But nobody took care of you. He reached the end of a row and turned the mower, lining up the next pass with the kind of geometric precision that came from a past life he didn't talk about. Diagonal cuts looked better than straight lines. Something about how the grass laid down in alternating directions caught the light differently. It was the kind of detail most people never noticed, which made it exactly the kind of detail Jake insisted on. If you were going to do something, even something as simple as cutting grass, you did it right. Honor lived in the small things, in the spaces where nobody was watching. The air smelled like cut grass and gasoline, and the faint sweetness of somebody's garden roses carried on the breeze. Summer in Pennsylvania, when the humidity made everything feel like breathing through wet cotton. Emma would be with Mrs. Chen right now, the 60-year-old widow 3 doors down from their apartment who watched her after school for $20 a day, cash, no questions, which Jake appreciated more than she probably knew. Mrs. Chen had grandchildren in California she never got to see, and Emma had a grandmother she'd never known, and somehow the arrangement worked for everyone. He thought about Emma now, as he always did when his mind had space to wander. 7 years old, starting second grade in the fall, with her mother's dark curls and her mother's quick smile and, thank God, nothing of the sadness that had taken her mother away. Sarah had been gone 3 years now, and some days it felt like 3 decades and other days like 3 hours. Cancer, the doctors had said, as if giving it a name made it make sense. Stage 4, they'd added, as if the number mattered when the answer was already written. She'd fought like hell. His Sarah always fought like hell. But some enemies don't care how hard you fight. Jake pushed the thought away, locked it back in the box where he kept all the things that would break him if he let them out at the wrong time. He was good at boxes. He'd spent years learning how to build them, how to make them strong, how to seal them tight enough that nothing leaked through the cracks. It was a skill they'd taught him in another life, refined through practice he wished he'd never had. The front lawn was nearly finished. 2 more passes and he'd move to the back, then load up his equipment and head to the final property of the day. The Ashford estate, as it happened. He'd picked up that account just last month when the previous service had dropped them. Some dispute about payment schedules that Jake hadn't asked about. He'd learned not to ask too many questions. People hired him to cut grass, not to be curious. Movement caught his eye. Someone stepping onto the terrace of the Ashford house, a figure in white against the gray stone of the patio. Jake kept his eyes on his work, maintained his steady pace. Not his business. The mower's wheels left perfect lines in the grass behind him, a temporary order imposed on growing things. "Excuse me." The voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the mower's engine, but Jake heard it. You learned to hear quiet things when staying alive used to depend on it. He stopped, killed the engine, straightened up slowly. His back complained. 3 hours of pushing a mower would do that, especially when you were on your feet from 7 in the morning until sunset. He turned. The woman from the Ashford house stood at the property line about 20 feet away. She was younger than he'd expected, early 30s maybe, with blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and the kind of casual elegance that came from never having to think about whether your clothes matched. White linen shirt, jeans that probably cost more than Jake's monthly rent, no shoes. She stood there barefoot on the grass like she belonged to a different world entirely, which she probably did. "Yes, ma'am?" Jake said, keeping his voice level, professional. His hands hung at his sides, relaxed but ready. A habit so ingrained he didn't even notice it anymore. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Jake saw something unexpected. Not arrogance, not the casual dismissal he'd grown used to from people in houses like hers. Something else. Uncertainty, maybe. Or fear, which seemed impossible for someone who lived behind walls like those. "I'm Victoria," she said, taking a half step forward. "Victoria Ashford. You do the lawn care?" "Yes, ma'am. Jake Brennan. I'm scheduled to do your property after I finish here." He paused. "Is there a problem?" "No, no problem." She looked back at her house, then at him again, and Jake caught it clearly now in her eyes. Definitely fear, the kind that sat behind your rib cage and made your breath come shallow. He knew that fear. He'd seen it on faces in places far away, and once, memorably, in his bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning about 6 months after he'd come home for good. "I was wondering," she said, her voice quieter now, "if I could hire you. For something else, something private." The words hung in the air between them, and Jake felt the familiar tightening in his gut that came when things were about to get complicated. In his experience, nothing good ever came from wealthy people wanting something private from men they'd never met before. He should say no. He should finish this lawn, skip the Ashford property entirely, go home to Emma and those chicken nuggets and the simple safety of their simple life. But he'd also learned to recognize real fear when he saw it. And whatever was putting that look in Victoria Ashford's eyes wasn't simple or small. "What kind of something?" he asked, even though he already knew he was going to regret asking. She glanced around as if checking whether anyone could overhear them in this empty neighborhood on this Thursday afternoon. "Can you come to the house? Just for a few minutes, please. I'll pay you for your time." Every instinct Jake had cultivated over 7 years of deliberate invisibility told him to decline politely and walk away. But there was something else, too. A deeper instinct, older and more insistent. that recognized a person in trouble and couldn't turn away. It was the same instinct that had made him good at his old job and terrible at leaving it behind. "All right," he heard himself say. "Let me secure my equipment." She nodded, relief washing over her face so clearly it was almost painful to see. "Thank you. The side door, by the garage. I'll meet you there." She turned and walked quickly back toward her house, moving like someone who'd already spent too much time visible, too much time exposed. Jake watched her go, then looked down at his grass-stained hands, his worn work boots, the mower that still needed a new spark plug. He thought about Emma, waiting at Mrs. Chen's, innocent and safe and unaware that her father was about to do something potentially stupid. Then he thought about the fear in Victoria Ashford's eyes and how some things couldn't be walked away from, no matter how much he wanted to. He bent down, checked that the mower's fuel line was secure, and started gathering his things. The sun continued its slow arc across the Pennsylvania sky, and Jake Brennan took the first step toward a complication he couldn't yet name but somehow already knew would change everything. Behind him, the neat diagonal lines across Mrs. Patterson's lawn stood as evidence that order, however temporary, was still possible in a chaotic world. The side entrance to the Ashford house was exactly what Jake expected, understated, expensive, with the kind of security system that cost more than most people's cars. A discreet camera above the door, motion sensors in the eaves, and deadbolts that spoke of serious concern about uninvited visitors. Victoria opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been standing there waiting. "Come in," she said, stepping back to let him enter. Jake crossed the threshold into a mudroom that was larger than his apartment's living room. Slate tile floors, built-in benches with cushions that had never been sat on, a row of hooks holding jackets that probably saw use twice a year. Everything was clean, organized, and somehow sad in its perfection, like a stage set for a life that wasn't actually being lived. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, closing the door behind him. "I should explain, I didn't know who else to ask." She led him through the mudroom into a kitchen that belonged in a magazine spread. White marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, an island big enough to land a helicopter on. Afternoon sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out on a backyard designed by someone who charged by the square foot. Jake stopped just inside the doorway, suddenly aware of his grass-stained clothes, his work boots on her pristine floor, the smell of gasoline and sweat that clung to him like a second skin. "I should take my boots off," he said. "Don't worry about it." Victoria moved to the island, gripped its edge with both hands like she needed something to hold on to. "Can I get you some water? You must be hot." "Water would be good, thank you." She pulled a glass from a cabinet, actual glass, not plastic, and filled it from a filter built into the refrigerator door. Her hands shook slightly as she handed it to him. Jake took the glass, drank half of it in one long pull. Cold, clean water had never tasted so good. He'd been dehydrated and hadn't fully realized it until now. "Thank you," he said again. He set the glass on the counter carefully, keeping it far from the edge. "Ms. Ashford, what is it you need?" She took a breath, seemed to gather herself. When she spoke, her voice was steadier. "First, I need to know something, and I need you to be honest. Can you do that? I don't make a habit of lying. Have you ever done anything besides lawn care? Before this, I mean, in your past?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples in directions Jake didn't want to follow. He kept his face neutral, a skill that once saved his life more than once. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been watching you. Not in a weird way, but the last few weeks, since you started working on my property. The way you move, the way you notice things, the way you—" She stopped, frustrated with herself. "You're not just a lawn care guy, I can tell." Jake was quiet for a moment, weighing options, calculating risks. It was a skill set that never really left you. "I did 12 years in the Army," he finally said, which was true as far as it went. "Came home, started a family, needed steady work. That's the whole story." It wasn't the whole story, not even close. But it was the story he told, the one that was safe and simple and kept the complicated parts locked away where they belonged. Victoria studied him, and Jake had the uncomfortable feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. Special Forces. You ask a lot of questions for someone who called me here. I'm sorry. You're right. She pushed away from the island, wrapped her arms around herself despite the warmth of the kitchen. I'm being questioned by the police tomorrow, for the third time, and I don't think they believe me. Believe you about what? About him. About Marcus. She said the name like it hurt to speak it aloud. Marcus Hale. We dated, 2 years ago, for about 6 months. I ended it because he was intense, controlling. He didn't like that I had my own life, my own money, my own decisions. Jake listened, his body still, his attention complete. It was another skill from the old days. How to be absolutely present when someone needed to talk. How to hear not just words, but the truth beneath them. After I broke it off, he started showing up. At restaurants where I'd made reservations. At my gym. At the grocery store. Always with some excuse. Running into me by coincidence. Right, but it was never coincidence. He'd text me at 2 in the morning. Call from blocked numbers, send flowers to my office with notes that seemed sweet but felt like threats. You went to the police. 3 times now. The first time they took a report, said they'd talk to him. He denied everything. Said I was confused that we'd just happened to be at the same places. The detective, this older guy who looked at me like I was wasting his time, he basically told me that being in public spaces wasn't a crime. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd heard variations of this story before. In different contexts, different places. He'd seen where it led when nobody took it seriously. The second time, Victoria continued, was after he somehow got into my building. I have security, a doorman, cameras, all of it. But I came home one night and found a note under my door. Inside my building, inside my floor. The note said, "You looked beautiful today in that blue dress." And I had worn a blue dress that day, to a client meeting downtown. What did the police say? They said maybe he followed me, saw what I was wearing, and somehow got past security. Maybe bribed someone, maybe slipped in with a delivery. They talked to the building staff, checked the cameras, found nothing. Marcus, of course, denied knowing anything about it. Her voice was getting tighter now, the fear bleeding through. The third time, last week, I woke up at 4 in the morning to my phone buzzing. 37 text messages, all from different numbers. All sent within 20 minutes. Some were just my name. Over and over. Victoria, Victoria, Victoria. Others were descriptions of things in my house. My house. The painting in your bedroom is slightly crooked. You left your laptop open on the kitchen counter. You should lock your windows when you shower. Jake's hands had curled into fists without him realizing it. He forced them to relax, but the cold feeling in his chest had spread, become something harder. Was he in your house? I don't know. I searched everywhere. Nothing was taken. Nothing was disturbed. The police came, looked around, interviewed Marcus again. He had an alibi. He was at some charity gala with 200 witnesses. His lawyer suggested I might be experiencing stress, might need to talk to someone about anxiety. The way she said anxiety made it clear what the lawyer had really meant. Crazy, hysterical, unreliable. The detective told me yesterday that unless there's evidence of an actual crime, breaking and entering, assault, credible threat, there's not much they can do. He suggested I get a restraining order, but his tone made it clear he thought I was overreacting. She finally looked directly at Jake, and the fear in her eyes was naked now, undisguised. I'm not overreacting. I'm not crazy. Someone is in my life who shouldn't be, and they're not going to stop. And I am terrified. Jake believed her. You didn't fake the kind of fear he was seeing. You didn't fake the slight tremor in your hands or the way your voice cracked on certain words, or the desperate hope that flashed when someone actually listened instead of dismissed. What is it you want from me, Ms. Ashford? Protection, but not just standing around looking intimidating. I need someone who knows how to spot surveillance, how to check for cameras or bugs or whatever technology he might be using. I need someone who can tell me if I'm actually safe or just pretending to be. She paused. And I need someone who, if it comes to it, can handle themselves if he shows up and the situation goes bad. It was the most honest description of a security job Jake had heard in a long time. No euphemisms, no corporate speak. Just raw need from someone who'd exhausted their official options and was turning to unofficial ones. I can't, Jake said, and watched hope die in her eyes. I have a daughter, 7 years old. Her name's Emma. If something happened to me, I'll pay you $20,000 for 2 weeks. That's all I'm asking. 2 weeks of just being present, checking my house, making sure I'm not insane. That's less than $1,000 a day. $20,000. Jake did the math automatically. That was 4 months of rent. Emma's art supplies, the expensive ones, new tires for his truck, which needed them badly, the security deposit on a better apartment in a better school district. It was a number that could change things. The kind of number a man who cut grass for $40 a yard never saw in one place. It was also the kind of number that came with complications, the kind that got people hurt. I don't do that work anymore, he said. I got out for a reason. Because of your daughter? Because of a lot of things. Jake picked up his water glass, finished it, set it back down with the careful precision of someone buying time to think. Ms. Ashford, Victoria, please. Victoria, you need professional security, not some guy who cuts grass and used to do something else. There are firms that specialize in, I've called 3 firms, they want full teams. 24-hour protection, cameras everywhere, drivers, the whole thing. They want to turn my life into a prison to keep me safe from someone who might not even be doing anything illegal. And they all want me to sign contracts and waivers and... She stopped, swallowed hard. I just want someone who can tell me the truth about what's happening. Someone who doesn't have a company policy or a legal department. Someone who sees me as a person instead of a liability. Jake understood that too. How being wealthy meant everyone treated you like a problem to be managed instead of a human being to be helped. How money created its own kind of isolation, its own kind of helplessness. He thought about Emma, who would be finishing her snack at Mrs. Chen's right about now, probably explaining her latest drawing in that earnest way she had when she was excited about something. He thought about the promise he'd made to Sarah, in those final weeks when she could still speak clearly, that he'd keep their daughter safe no matter what, that he'd be there for her always no matter what. He thought about Victoria Ashford, standing in her expensive kitchen, more alone than anyone should be, asking for help from a stranger because there was nobody else to ask. 2 weeks, he said. And we do this my way. If I say something's not safe, we change it. If I say we need to call the police, we call them. If I say it's time for professionals, you don't argue. Agreed? The relief that washed over her face was answer enough. Agreed. When can you start? I start by asking questions. Tell me everything about Marcus Hale. Where he works, where he lives, what kind of car he drives, who his friends are. Everything. She nodded, pulled out her phone. I have information, notes I've been keeping. The police weren't interested, but I documented everything. Good, smart. Jake glanced at the window, at the angle of the sun. I need to finish my work today, pick up my daughter, get her home and fed. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Early, before most people are awake. 5:30. Here? No, public place. Somewhere with cameras, but not too crowded. You know Sammy's Diner on Route 30? I can find it. 5:30 tomorrow. Bring your notes, bring any photos you have of him. Bring anything else you think might matter, we'll start there. Victoria nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders now that she had a plan, someone to share the fear with. Thank you. You don't know what this means. Jake thought about saying that he did know, that he'd been where she was in different ways, that being alone with fear was something he understood down to his bones. But that felt like too much truth for a conversation in a stranger's kitchen. Get the best locks you can, he said instead. And until I see you tomorrow, don't open your door for anyone. Not delivery people, not neighbors, not anyone. Understood? Understood. He moved toward the mudroom, toward the door, toward the escape route his instincts were screaming at him to take while he still could. At the threshold, he stopped, turned back. Victoria, When I ask a question, I need complete honesty. This doesn't work if you hold things back because they're embarrassing or complicated. Can you do that? She met his eyes, and he saw steel underneath the fear. Good. She'd need that. Yes, she said. I can do that. Jake nodded once, then let himself out into the afternoon heat. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer. He had 90 minutes to get his equipment loaded, drive to Mrs. Chen's, pick up Emma, and get home in time to start dinner. 90 minutes to transition back into being just dad, just the guy who cut grass and packed lunches and checked homework. 90 minutes before he had to figure out how to tell a 7-year-old that daddy had just made a decision that might put everything at risk. But that could wait. For now, he just needed to finish one more lawn, drive one more route, maintain one more day of the careful order he'd built from the wreckage of his old life. The mower started on the second pull, and Jake pushed it forward, leaving new lines in Mrs. Patterson's grass. Temporary and perfect and already beginning to fade. Emma was waiting on Mrs. Chen's porch when Jake pulled up, her purple backpack beside her, her drawing pad open on her lap. She looked up at the sound of his truck, the old Ford with the bad muffler that Jake kept meaning to fix, and her face broke into the smile that made every hard day worth it. Daddy. She gathered her things and ran to the truck, dark curls bouncing, her Spider-Man t-shirt grass-stained from whatever recess adventure she'd had that day. Jake's heart did what it always did when he saw her, clenched and released, a reminder that everything worth protecting fit inside a 60-pound frame with his late wife's eyes. Hey, sweetheart. He leaned across to open the passenger door and she climbed in with practiced ease, buckling herself while he waved thanks to Mrs. Chen standing in her doorway. Good day? Really good. We had art, and Mrs. Morrison said my cat drawing was very realistic even though I made it purple because normal cats are boring. She pulled the drawing pad onto her lap. Flipped to the page. See? Jake looked at the purple cat, which did in fact look quite realistic aside from its color, and felt the weight of the afternoon slide off his shoulders slightly. This was real. This mattered. Not security jobs or wealthy women in expensive houses or men named Marcus Hale, who couldn't take no for an answer. That's a great cat, he said. Best purple cat I've ever seen. It's the only purple cat you've ever seen, Daddy. She rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience of a 7-year-old dealing with an obtuse parent. But thank you. They drove home through afternoon traffic, Emma chattering about her day, how Kaylee brought gummy worms for snack time, how Mr. Peters, the music teacher, let them play the drums, how she was definitely going to be an artist when she grew up, or maybe a veterinarian, or possibly both. Jake listened with half his attention, while the other half ran calculations he didn't want to be running. $20,000, 2 weeks. A woman who needed help and a man who'd sworn he was done helping in ways that might get him killed. It was a simple equation with no simple answer. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted house in a neighborhood that was trying hard to be nicer than it was. The building was old but maintained, with a landlord who fixed things within a reasonable time frame and didn't ask too many questions about Jake's irregular work schedule. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, and a living room where Emma's drawings covered most of one wall in a colorful collage of her imagination. Home. Small, imperfect, safe. Chicken nuggets? Emma asked as they climbed the stairs, already knowing the answer. Chicken nuggets, Jake confirmed, and carrot sticks. Ugh. Why do vegetables have to exist? Because without them you'd turn into a chicken nugget yourself, that's just science. She giggled. Unlocked their door with the key she wore on a lanyard around her neck, another safety measure Jake had implemented, teaching her to always have her key, always check the peepholes, always be aware. Skills a 7-year-old shouldn't need, but that a father with his history couldn't help teaching. Inside, Emma dumped her backpack by the door and headed for her room to change out of her school clothes. Jake moved to the kitchen on autopilot, pulling nuggets from the freezer, preheating the oven, washing carrots at the sink. Through the wall, he could hear Emma singing to herself, some song from a Disney movie he'd watched with her a dozen times. This was the life he'd built. Small, predictable, safe. After Sarah died, After the grief had nearly swallowed him whole, he'd crawled out of that darkness with one goal: give Emma a childhood that didn't include fear. No deployments that might not come home from. No midnight phone calls about things gone wrong in places whose names were classified. Just steady, boring present fatherhood in an apartment with good locks and neighbors who waved hello. And now Victoria Ashford wanted to pay him $20,000 to step back into a world he'd left behind. The oven beeped. Jake arranged nuggets on a baking sheet with the same precise spacing he applied to everything, old habits that would never die. He slid the sheet into the oven, set the timer, and stood there in his small kitchen staring at nothing. The truth was, he'd been invisible for 7 years, not just to the wealthy residents of Meadowbrook Estates, but to himself. He'd become a man who cut grass and packed lunches and attended parent-teacher conferences. And somewhere along the way he'd forgotten that he used to be someone else, someone capable, someone who could help people like Victoria when official channels failed them, someone who'd sworn he'd never be that person again. "Daddy?" Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, changed into shorts and a t-shirt that said "Girls Rule" in sparkly letters. "Can we watch a movie after dinner?" "Sure, your pick." Jake started cutting carrots into sticks, the knife moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from years of training with blades in contexts much different than vegetable prep. "What are you thinking?" "Something funny. I need funny today." "Rough day?" She climbed onto one of their mismatched kitchen chairs, rested her chin on her hands. "Kaylee said her dad is taking her to Disney World for her birthday. And I know we can't go to Disney World because it's really expensive, and I'm not even mad about it, but..." She trailed off, the unspoken wish hanging in the air. Jake's chest tightened. Emma never complained about what they didn't have. She was too young to fully understand how far $40,000 a year didn't stretch. How many small luxuries other kids took for granted that were impossible calculations in their household. But sometimes, in moments like this, the gap showed itself. $20,000, half a year's income, Disney World with enough left over for the good art supplies and a safety net that might let Jake sleep better at night. All he had to do was spend 2 weeks helping a stranger and hope that nothing went wrong. "Maybe someday," he said, which was what he always said, the non-committal answer that didn't promise what he couldn't deliver. "In the meantime, we've got chicken nuggets and funny movies and the best purple cat drawing in Pennsylvania." Emma smiled. Let him change the subject because she was good at that, at accepting what was and not demanding what couldn't be. It was a skill she'd learned too young, after her mother died and Jake had stumbled through those first terrible months of solo fatherhood, and it broke his heart a little bit every time she used it. They ate dinner at the small table, Emma telling him elaborate stories about what her purple cat would do if it were real, mostly adventures involving complicated heists to steal tuna fish. After dinner, they did dishes together. She washed, he dried, both of them singing off-key to whatever song played from Jake's old phone propped on the windowsill. Then movie time. Emma's choice. Some animated film about talking cars that they'd both seen a dozen times, but that still made her laugh. Jake sat on their sagging couch, Emma tucked against his side, and tried to focus on the movie. But his mind kept drifting to Victoria Ashford's kitchen, to the fear in her eyes. To the calculation he couldn't stop running. 2 weeks, $20,000. The risk versus the reward, versus the promise he'd made to his dying wife, versus the man he used to be, versus the man he'd tried to become. At 8:30, he put Emma to bed, going through the ritual they'd established, teeth brushed. Pajamas on, 3 books read. She always picked 3 and he always read them even when he was exhausted. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, listened to her prayers that included Mrs. Chen and Kaylee and the purple cat and all the sad people who need help. "I love you, Daddy," she said. Half asleep already, her voice small in the darkness. "I love you too, baby girl, more than anything in the world." He stood in her doorway for a long time after she'd fallen asleep, watching her breathe, memorizing the moment like he'd learned to do during deployments when he'd needed something solid to hold on to in the dark. She was his world, his entire world. Everything he did, every choice he made, had to start and end with keeping her safe and happy and unafraid. Could he do Victoria's job and maintain that? Or would stepping back into that old life, even temporarily, even for good reasons, risk the new one he'd built? Jake moved to the living room, pulled out his laptop, a cheap model that ran slowly but got the job done. He opened a browser, cleared his history out of habit, and started searching. Marcus Hale, Philadelphia. He'd told Victoria he'd start tomorrow, but old instincts died hard. When someone was in danger, you didn't wait. Marcus Hale had a digital footprint like a crater. CFO of a pharmaceutical company called Helix Dynamics, 36 years old, MBA from Wharton, board member of 2 charities, featured in Philadelphia Magazine's 40 Under 40 list 2 years ago. Photos showed a handsome man with perfect teeth and expensive suits, shaking hands with city council members, cutting ribbons at charity events, smiling in that way wealthy men smiled when they knew the camera was their friend. Jake found social media profiles, all public, all carefully curated. Posts about marathons run and books read and inspirational quotes about success. Nothing about Victoria. Nothing that suggested obsession or control or stalking. It was the profile of a successful, engaged, philanthropic citizen, which meant exactly nothing. Jake had known plenty of men who looked perfect on the surface and were monsters underneath. He'd been sent to stop some of them. Back when stopping monsters was his job. He dug deeper using search tricks he'd learned in a different life. Found news articles about Helix Dynamics, mostly positive, some controversy over drug pricing 3 years ago that had blown over. Found Marcus Hale's address, a condo in Rittenhouse Square. The kind of building with a doorman and a gym and views that cost $8,000 a month. Found his car registration, a Porsche 911, black, custom plates that said HLX CFO. Found nothing that screamed dangerous, which was often how it worked with men like this. They knew how to look good, how to play the game, how to make victims look crazy. Jake closed the laptop, rubbed his eyes. It was almost 11. He needed to sleep. 5:30 would come early. But his mind wouldn't settle, kept cycling through scenarios, threat assessments, contingency plans. Skills that had atrophied during 7 years of deliberately not using them, but that apparently were still there waiting just under the surface. He thought about calling her, telling her he'd changed his mind, that she should find someone else. But he knew there might not be anyone else. And he knew what happened to women who needed help and didn't get it, who fell through the cracks between not enough evidence and too late to matter. He thought about Emma, sleeping soundly in the next room, trusting that her father would always be there, would always keep her safe, would never put her at risk for the sake of a stranger with money. But he also thought about Sarah, in those last weeks when the morphine made her honest in ways that broke his heart. "Promise me you won't disappear," she'd said. "Promise me you won't become one of those ghosts who's there but not there. Emma needs a father who shows up." He'd promised, and he'd kept that promise, had shown up every day for 3 years, had been present and engaged and fully hers. But maybe showing up meant more than just being physically present. Maybe it meant being the man who could help when help was needed. The man who didn't turn away from people in trouble just because helping them was complicated. The man he used to be before he'd tried so hard to become someone else. Jake stood, moved to Emma's room one more time, looked in at his sleeping daughter. She'd kicked off her blanket, sprawled across the bed in that boneless way kids slept when they felt completely safe. He pulled the blanket back over her, careful not to wake her, and made a decision. 2 weeks. He'd help Victoria Ashford for 2 weeks, and he'd be smart about it, careful about it, full. And if at any point it felt like it might spill over into Emma's life, he'd walk away, money or no money. But for 2 weeks, he'd do what he'd once been very good at. He'd assess threats and neutralize them. He'd stand between danger and someone who couldn't stand there alone. And maybe, just maybe, he'd remember what it felt like to be useful for something other than cutting grass in straight lines. He went to his own room, set his alarm for 4:30, and lay down fully clothed on top of the blankets. Sleep would be hard, but he'd learned long ago how to function on minimal rest. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, and he'd handle it the way he'd always handled things, 1 hour at a time, one decision at a time, one step at a time. Outside, the city hummed its late-night song of distant sirens and passing cars and air conditioners laboring against the summer heat. Inside, Emma slept safe and Jake lay awake, and somewhere across town Victoria Ashford probably did the same, hoping that tomorrow would bring something closer to answers. The clock on Jake's nightstand clicked over to midnight, and Thursday became Friday, and a man who cut grass for a living prepared to become, for just 2 weeks, something else entirely. Something he'd sworn he'd left behind, but that, apparently, had never really left him. Sammy's diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease at 5:30 in the morning, exactly the way Jake remembered from the few times he'd stopped there on early jobs. Victoria arrived precisely on time, dressed down in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back. No makeup, trying to blend in, smart. "Coffee?" Jake asked as she slid into the booth across from him. "Please. Black." He signaled the waitress, ordered 2 coffees, waited until they were alone again before speaking. "Show me what you have." Victoria pulled out her phone, opened a folder. "I started documenting everything 6 months ago, when I realized the coincidences weren't coincidences." She scrolled through photos, screenshots of texts from blocked numbers, images of flower deliveries with cards that made Jake's jaw tighten, timestamps of calls at 3 in the morning. "This one," she said, stopping on a photo of a handwritten note. "This was under my door, inside my building." Jake read it. The words were precise, almost poetic. "You were wearing the blue dress yesterday. You looked like the sky before a storm. I miss storms." His hands curled around his coffee cup. "He has access to your building. Had. I changed all my locks. I added extra security. But yes. And the police said that he might have followed me, seen what I wore, gotten lucky with timing." Her voice was flat, exhausted. "They said a lot of things that added up to nothing." Jake spent the next hour going through everything. Marcus Hale's work schedule, his known addresses, his vehicle information, the timeline of incidents. Victoria had documented it all with the thoroughness of someone who knew nobody else would believe her unless she had perfect evidence. It reminded Jake of after-action reports, the kind of detailed accounting that saved lives when properly analyzed. "He's careful," Jake said finally. "Nothing here crosses the legal line enough to get him arrested. He's staying just on the edge, keeping plausible deniability." "So I'm crazy?" "No. You're being hunted by someone who knows how the system works." Jake leaned back, studied her across the table. "Men like Marcus. They understand that stalking laws have loopholes. That fear isn't evidence. That wealthy white men with good lawyers can explain away almost anything." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Relief, maybe, at being understood. "So what do? We start with your house. I need to sweep it completely. Cameras, listening devices, anything that might explain how he knows things he shouldn't know. Then we establish patterns. Where you go, when, how predictable you are. Predators rely on routine. I work from home mostly. Investment consulting. My clients come to me or we meet at their offices." "Good. Makes you harder to follow." Jake pulled out a small notepad, actual paper, not digital. "Old habits. I'll need access to your house today. All of it. I'll be thorough and it'll take time. Can you be somewhere else for a few hours?" "I have a meeting downtown at 10. I could extend it, get lunch after." "Perfect. I'll start at 9. He paused. "One more thing. If he's watching you, he'll notice someone new in your life. A man specifically. That might escalate things." "I thought about that. We could say you're a contractor I hired. Renovation work. Works for me. I'll bring tools. Make it look legitimate." Jake finished his coffee, watched Victoria do the same. In the growing morning light, he could see the exhaustion around her eyes. The weight of 6 months of fear that nobody else had validated. "Victoria, I need you to understand something. If I find what I think I'm going to find, this gets complicated. We might need to consider options outside the law." "What kind of options?" The kind where we make him understand that continuing this behavior has consequences the police can't protect him from. Jake held her gaze. I'm not talking about violence, I'm talking about pressure, leverage, making him believe that you're not alone anymore, and that the person standing with you knows things he doesn't want known. Victoria was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, whatever it takes, I just want my life back. They left separately, her first, then Jake 10 minutes later. He drove home through empty streets, arriving just as Emma's alarm went off. He made her breakfast, packed her lunch, walked her to Mrs. Chen's, all while running through mental checklists of what he'd need for the sweep. It was like muscle memory, his brain shifting into operational mode after 7 years of dormancy. At 9 sharp, Jake pulled into Victoria's driveway with his truck loaded with tools that included more than just hammers and wrenches. Inside his worn canvas bag, an RF detector that could find wireless cameras, a non-linear junction detector for finding electronic devices even when powered off, and a thermal scope he'd acquired through channels he didn't mention on tax forms, equipment left over from his old life, kept just in case, despite his insistence that he'd never need it again. Victoria let him in, then left for her meeting. Jake stood in the empty house and began the methodical process of searching for what he knew he'd find. Men like Marcus Hale didn't just magically know things. They used technology, and technology left signatures if you knew how to look for them properly. He found the first camera in her bedroom, hidden inside a smoke detector that looked identical to the real ones but had a tiny lens behind the vent grill. The second camera was in Victoria's bathroom, disguised as a towel hook. The third in her home office, built into a charging cable for her laptop. Jake photographed each one without touching them, documenting position and angle. His hand stayed steady, but inside he felt the cold rage that came from seeing someone's privacy violated this completely. 3 cameras, 3 different intimate spaces. Marcus Hale had been watching her sleep, shower, work. For how long? In the kitchen, Jake found something worse. A listening device tucked behind the refrigerator's waterline connection. Professional grade, probably good for 6 months on a single battery. Which meant Marcus had been hearing everything Victoria said in her own home. Every phone call, every conversation with friends, every moment she'd thought she was alone and safe. Jake wanted to destroy them all immediately, rip them out and crush them under his boot, but that would tip their hand. Instead, he left everything in place and continued the sweep methodically, room by room, corner by corner. By the time he finished 3 hours later, he'd found 7 devices total. 7 separate points of surveillance that explained exactly how Marcus Hale seemed omniscient, how he always knew what Victoria was wearing, where she was going, what she was thinking. He sat in Victoria's kitchen, the kitchen he now knew was bugged, and called her cell. How much longer is your meeting? I can leave now. Why? Did you find something? We need to talk, and not in your house. He paused, choosing his words carefully in case Marcus was listening to this call somehow. Victoria, it's worse than you thought, but we can fix it. Meet me at Rittenhouse Square in 30 minutes, the bench near the fountain. I'm on my way. Jake met her at the park, chose a bench in the open where they could see anyone approaching, where conversation couldn't be overheard or recorded without sophisticated equipment Marcus probably didn't have access to. When he told her what he'd found, all 7 devices, the scope of the invasion, the months of watching and listening, Victoria's face went white, then red, emotions cycling through shock and violation and fury faster than she could process them. He's been watching me in my bedroom, in my bathroom. Her hands shook, gripping the edge of the bench so hard her knuckles went white. For how long? Based on the equipment, maybe 3 months, maybe more. Jake's voice was gentle but firm, the tone he'd used with teammates who'd just survived something traumatic. But now we know. And knowing changes everything. We have the advantage now. We call the police. This is illegal. This is surveillance. This is evidence we obtained without a warrant during an illegal sweep of your home. A defense attorney would have it thrown out before lunch, and Marcus would walk. Jake leaned forward, making sure she was hearing him through the rage and fear. But we can use it differently. We can make Marcus understand that we know what he's done, that we have proof, and that if he doesn't stop immediately and completely, we'll make his life very difficult in ways that don't involve police or courts or lawyers who can make evidence disappear. How? Victoria's voice was hard now. The fear burned away by anger. Good. Anger was useful. Anger could be directed, focused, weaponized. Leave that to me. First, we removed the devices, carefully without him knowing we found them. We replaced them with dummy feeds, so he thinks he's still watching you, but he's actually watching empty rooms or recorded loops. Then we set a trap. We make him come to us on our terms in a place where we control everything, and we make him understand that his choices are simple. Disappear completely from your life, or face consequences that will destroy everything he's built. Victoria stared at him, and Jake could see her mind working. Processing, accepting. She'd come to him because official channels had failed her. Now she was understanding that unofficial channels had their own rules, their own methods, their own justice. When do we start? She asked. Tonight, Jake said. Tonight we start taking your life back. But Victoria, I need you to trust me completely. What I'm going to do, it's not legal, it's not nice. It involves threats and intimidation and making a man very, very afraid. Can you live with that? She thought for only a moment. Can I watch? Jake allowed himself a small smile. No, but you'll know when it's done. You'll feel it. The fear will be gone and you'll know you're safe again, and that's all that matters in the end. They spent the next hour planning. Jake explained exactly what equipment they'd need, exactly how they'd remove and replace Marcus's surveillance system, exactly how they'd bait the trap. Victoria listened, asked smart questions, took notes. She was good under pressure. Another thing wealth and privilege couldn't teach, but adversity could. By the time they parted ways, the sun was high and hot, and Jake had 4 hours before he needed to pick up Emma. 4 hours to acquire what he needed, to prepare for what came next, to become, just for a little while, the man he used to be. The operator, the problem solver, the guy who made bad men very sorry they'd ever hurt people who couldn't fight back alone, but who had someone willing to fight for them anyway. The confrontation came on the 8th day. In a parking garage Jake had chosen for its sight lines and camera angles. He'd led Marcus there using the tracking device on Victoria's car, had watched the man follow at a careful distance, had felt the predator's confidence even from half a mile away. That confidence was about to be shattered into pieces so small Marcus would never put it back together properly. Jake stepped out of Victoria's Tesla as Marcus pulled into a space 2 rows over. The man sat in his Porsche for 3 minutes, gathering courage or planning his approach, then emerged looking every inch the successful executive. Expensive suit, perfect hair, the kind of confidence that came from never being told no in ways that actually mattered to him. Jake intercepted him before he got within 15 feet of Victoria's car. Marcus stopped, surprise flickering across his handsome face before settling into a smile that made Jake's hands curl into fists at his sides. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting this was his parking garage. His city, his world, and everyone else was just visiting. "Marcus Hale, we need to talk about Victoria Ashford." Jake's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone he'd used in interrogations in places that officially didn't exist on any map. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The smile stayed in place, but Marcus's eyes were calculating now, assessing threat levels, running his own risk analysis. "You don't, but I know you. I know about the 7 cameras in her house. Bedroom, bathroom, office. I know about the listening devices. I know about every text, every call, every flower delivery, every moment you've made her feel unsafe in her own life." Jake took 1 step closer, watched Marcus's confidence crack just slightly. "And I know it stops tonight, right now, this moment." Marcus's smile faded. "I don't know what she's told you, but I have photographs, serial numbers, your fingerprints all over the equipment. Federal crime, Marcus. 10 years minimum, probably more given the stalking charges that would come with it. 1 phone call to the FBI and your life as you know it ends completely." Jake's voice was cold now, Antarctic cold. "I could make that call right now, but Victoria asked me not to. She wanted this handled quietly. She wanted you to have one chance to walk away with your life intact. So here's what happens next. And you don't get to negotiate. You're bluffing. If you had evidence, you delete her number. You never contact her again. No calls, texts, flowers, nothing. You sell your condo and move to a different city. You quit your job. You leave Philadelphia. You disappear from her life so completely she forgets you ever existed. Jake took another step. They were close now. Close enough that Marcus could see something in Jake's eyes that made him step backward involuntarily. You have 24 hours to prove you're gone. Condo listing goes live. Resignation letter gets submitted. Phone gets a new number. That's not negotiable, that's survival. You're threatening me. Marcus tried to sound outraged, but his voice shook. I'm promising you. Jake's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I spent 12 years in special operations. I know 47 ways to end you without leaving evidence. I know how to access your finances, your emails, your whole carefully constructed life. And I know people who think men like you are problems that need permanent solutions. 24 hours, Marcus. Or I stop being nice and start being efficient. It was mostly bluff. Jake wasn't connected anymore. Wouldn't actually hurt someone who wasn't an immediate physical threat. But Marcus didn't know that. Marcus just saw a man who looked like he'd done violence before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again if necessary. Jake moved faster than Marcus could track, closing the final distance in one stride, getting into the man's personal space in a way that made every one of Marcus's instincts scream danger. He didn't touch him. Didn't need to. Proximity was enough when you knew how to use it properly. 24 hours, Jake repeated. Or I start making phone calls. First to the FBI, then to your employer, then to every journalist in Philadelphia who'd love a story about a 40 under 40 success story who likes to watch women shower without their knowledge or consent. Your choice. Your last choice. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly tripped, caught himself against his Porsche. All the arrogance had drained from his face, leaving just naked fear. Good. Fear was honest. Fear was real. Fear would keep him away when threats of jail time apparently hadn't. You can't. I already have. Everything documented. Everything backed up. Everything ready to destroy you if you give me one single reason. Jake pulled out his phone, showed Marcus a photo of one of the cameras, serial number clearly visible. All you have to do is disappear. That's more mercy than you deserve, more than you showed Victoria. Take it and run, or stay and burn. Stay. I genuinely don't care which you choose. Marcus looked past Jake to where Victoria sat in her car, watching through the windshield. For just a moment, something ugly twisted his expression. Rage, entitlement, the fury of a man who'd lost control. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful mask of someone who'd just been beaten at his own game and knew it. Fine, he said quietly. I'll leave her alone, I'll go. 24 hours, I'll be checking, and Marcus? Jake waited until the man met his eyes one final time. If you ever even think about her again, I'll know. And next time, we don't talk. Marcus got into his Porsche with shaking hands and drove away too fast. Tires squealing. Jake watched until the car disappeared, then walked back to Victoria's Tesla and slid into the passenger seat. Is it over? She asked quietly. It's over, Jake said. He'll disappear. Men like that are cowards when you push back hard enough. When someone finally makes them face consequences. Victoria started crying then. Not sad tears, but relief, the kind that came when months of fear finally broke. Jake sat quietly beside her, let her cry it out, didn't offer platitudes, just presence, which was sometimes all anyone needed from another human being. 2 weeks later, Marcus Hale's condo was sold, his resignation accepted, his entire presence scrubbed from Philadelphia. Victoria paid Jake his $20,000 and donated $100,000 more to veterans services. Jake took Emma to Disney World, moved them to a better apartment, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for 7 years. He could be both men, the father and the operator. The quiet man who knew when to stop being quiet. And that was enough, that was everything, that was finally blessedly home.